Hello, everyone. Welcome to this special interview and Q&A session brought to you by Eve University. Before we begin, our listeners should know that it is possible we may hear some colorful and potentially profane language in this interview. That's the rumor anyway, so be forewarned, please. I am your moderator, Neville Smith. I'm the teaching director of Eve University, and we're currently celebrating our 10th anniversary since our corporation's founding throughout the month of March with a series of public interviews of prominent Eve online personalities. Of course, the first person I thought of is probably the most famous person in all of Eve Online. So I issued an invitation to our guest today, and he was very kind to accept it. So I'm very pleased to introduce our guest. He's the CEO of Goonwarm, head of Goonswarm Federation, principal leader of the CFC, a major coalition in null security space. He's also a former chairman of the Council of Stellar Management, as well as an entrepreneurial publisher of the popular online gaming and related news site, the Mittani.com. So welcome, Mittani, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I think the last time I spoke to E-UNI was actually before I became CEO. We had a lecture about espionage and metagaming back when I was just a spy guy.
That's right. I think that lecture is still somewhere ensconced deep in the library on our Eve University wiki if anyone wants to go back and listen to that. So, and we'll touch on some of those issues today. I do have a few questions, but for those of you who want to ask questions, go ahead and type them into the lecture.e-uni chat channel. Please preface them with a Q colon so I know it's a question. But first, I've got a few warm-up questions here for you. Let's start with a non-Eve related question first.
Okay.
Your tagline on the news site, the Mittani.com, says that you like, and I quote here, yoga, Alaskan Malamutes, bacon, and delegation, unquote. Bacon, I think, needs no explanation, obviously, but tell us a little bit about your affection for yoga and the Alaskan Malamute breed.
Well, my puppy is an Alaskan Malamute, and I'm not really shy about how much I like those dogs. I've always, I like wolf dogs, basically. I don't like pugs. If you have a pug, I'm terribly sorry. And I do a lot of yoga. It's rather silly of me. I do probably practicing about 4 to 5 times a week, usually vinyasa power flow. I've been doing it for 6-7 years now. I'm very flexible at this point.
Well, flexibility is good. I actually, in terms of dogs, I have a Siberian Husky myself. So,
there you go. Exactly.
Yep.
Primitive breeds are awesome.
They're fantastic, although they act more like cats than dogs half the time unless you have food or have them on a leash.
Yeah, getting them to actually recall is nearly impossible. They're all princesses, even the boys.
Now, you also mentioned delegation as one of your likes in your tagline, and I'd like to explore that with you a bit. What has being the leader of Goonswarm, which now has more than 12,000 members, taught you about delegation?
Well, most of what I end up doing as the leader is what I call org work, is setting up structures within the alliance and within the coalition that can function independently. Ideally speaking, every single alliance within the CFC and every single directorate organization within Goonswarm is able to manage things without having single-person dependencies, burning people out, and without requiring constant micromanagement. Way back in the day when I first got started in Eve, I thought that leadership was mostly about waving flags and fleet commanding and all that other sort of the stereotypical view. But mostly it's about arranging structures in a way that makes them as effective as possible while requiring as little hands-on management as possible.
And how do you make decisions, or how do you subdivide? How often do you have to reorganize your structure in order to accommodate the different changes that, obviously what worked a couple years ago may not be working today. So how do you know, what are the clues that tell you that it's time to make a change in your structure?
Well, basically an organization starts breaking, and you can tell that the org has burnout or what have you when you lose directors or people associated with it, or it just stops fulfilling its basic functions, and then it requires attention from the executive to actually come in and try to fix it. Probably the single biggest secret to Goonswarm's success, if you accuse us of succeeding, is when we shifted from a pretty traditional directorate structure where you have one director in charge of a particular thing, like you have a director of finance, you have a director of logistics. We shifted to a team system almost immediately after I took over CEO-ship in like May of 2010. So we actually have 7 or 8 logistics directors. There is no one boss of logistics. Everyone on that team is responsible for making sure that the entirety of that organization works. We don't have a finance director. We have a finance team. Again, there's no one finance boss. Everyone is responsible for making sure that things work. And when you shift to a team structure, you lose directors a lot less to burnout. Back in the day, Goonswarm would have like one finance guy, maybe 1 or 2 logistics guys, and what I noticed before I became CEO is that it was a constant problem. The organization would work great when that one person was doing all of the work, and then they'd burn out, and then you would be screwed until you found another guy to sort of take up that mantle, and then they'd burn out. So it was this continual process of ruining your talent. If you spread the responsibilities out, you're able to retain your talent much better, and that way your orgs don't break as much. But to answer the original question, really you know that an org needs to be workshopped or reformed when its basic functions start getting dropped. Like when towers start getting mistimed or not fueled properly for logistics. For diplomacy, if your allies aren't happy with the service that your diplomats are providing, you just have to monitor the basic functions and make sure that they're happening.
Now, it's a little different. I mean, 12,000 people is a huge organization, but of course, if it was in a commercial enterprise, you can use measurements and rewards and financial rewards. You don't have that in Goonswarm. So how do you maintain motivating people and trying to get them to do what you want to do? Because after all, this is just a silly game.
Well, there are methods that you can use to incentivize people, even in a volunteer or hobby organization. In fact, some studies that have come out about incentivizing people with capital in the real world, in terms of executive compensation and what have you, it's actually, in a lot of ways, it's easier to motivate people who are interested and engaged in a hobby if you give them autonomy and responsibility. If you give people autonomy and responsibility and you give them like sort of a field, a portfolio that they can do work on, usually they'll be incredibly happy to do it. So like logistics directors, you find somebody who actually enjoys doing logistics, and then you say, I'm not going to tell you how to do your job. All I care about is the results and the end goal. And it's entirely up to you and your buddies on the logistics team to figure out how you get to that goal. That's your autonomy. That's your responsibility. This is your thing. Make some magic happen. And usually if you turn people loose and you get a good, talented crew together that enjoys working together, they really enjoy it because they get to make it happen their way. I find that if you deal with a position in organization that doesn't have much autonomy, that has to do something very mechanical and repetitive, that doesn't really have much agency for that person, those are the organizations where you have a really high degree of burnout. So reimbursement is a high burnout task. Reimbursers in nullsec are people who have to hand out ISK to pilots who have lost ships in combat, and it's sort of a mechanical thing. And those you can incentivize by providing Plex or ISK or payment, basically, for doing a mechanical task. Auth teams as well. Auth are the people who accept people into Goonswarm or what have you. So there's ways around it, but for the areas that are not purely mechanical, you just give people responsibility, you don't micromanage them, and you turn them loose and let them see what their talents can provide. And normally speaking, if you've got a good team of people, you will be blown away by what your dudes can come up with, things that you would never come up with yourself.
Yeah, we find that in Eve University, too. It's amazing when you let people have free rein to do things. Basically, what you're talking about is finding people's intrinsic motivators and not rely on extrinsic kinds of motivations.
Absolutely. Though again, there are certain tasks that you do have to have extrinsic motivation for if it's not an inherently entertaining thing. But most of the things we do in EVE, thankfully, you can find a way for people to have fun, and then you just sort of bring them together and turn them loose.
Let's step back a bit. Tell us a little bit about when did you become first aware of EVE Online, and what motivated you to join the game?
Well, like most of our people, I learned about EVE from a something awful megathread back in the day before Goon Fleet existed. Goons were a scattered people. We had 3 or 4 different small corporations that never really reached social critical mass, which meant, like most organizations that don't have enough people to become an institution, they sort of disintegrate after a period of time. So the precursor organization to Goon Fleet was a little corporation in LowSec called Lordless, which had Remedial, who was the founder of Goon Fleet later, myself, and several of, actually a lot of the old core of people who became directors in Goon Fleet. So I read this megathread. This is how many goons find games, is we're on the game subforum on Something Awful. We read a megathread, which is basically like a pitch saying, here is this cool game, you should come play it with goons, you can do all these things. Personally, I was motivated by the stories of espionage. The, Istvan Shigatsu was basically my hero and role model coming into this game. And there was a story which turned out to be fake called The Great Heist by Night Freeze, which also told a tale of espionage and metagaming. And, that was something I'd been playing World of Warcraft before that, and I was really getting bored with it. And the idea of a game where you could do anything and had spaceships, I gave it a try and really enjoyed playing with goons. And then I was on hiatus for a little bit after that when Lordless exploded, like most small organizations do. Then 3 or 4 months later, after Lordless had imploded, Remedial got the band back together and had the genius idea of, instead of having a small group of goons which will inevitably implode in drama, you advertise on Something Awful to bring in as many goons as possible, and you just get that social critical mass to turn it into an institution. You get 500 newbies and rifters in Syndicate and see what happens, and the rest is history.
You mentioned the metagame, and you also did a lecture with us, as you said, several years ago. It sounds to me that you're more attracted to playing the game around the game, the politics and relationships of players, as opposed to actually playing the game itself. Is that true?
I'd say that's fair. I mean, when I first began playing, I mined Crokite and Syndicate like everybody else who was a newbie goon. And, the gameplay of EVE itself, particularly the PvE gameplay, is really subpar. It's not ideal. I really wish that CCP would focus on both the new player experience and on just getting some intrinsically entertaining PvE. I think that's one of the bottlenecks for the game's development. But once I was appointed the director of espionage for Goon Fleet way back in the day, and I think this is probably March of 2006, I focused almost exclusively on the metagame. It was something I could do from my office, and just chatting to people on Skype or on Jabber. And then, oddly enough, in the Fountain War, I was actually taught how to FC capitals, and I never really FC'd subcaps that much because I'm really bad at thinking in 3D. But I ended up, during the Fountain War, grinding an insane amount of structures using dreadnoughts. So I like caps because they allow me to click a button and Sino home rather than taking gates. And in the Halloween War, I've been forced by my loving directorate to run supercarriers and take out Sov garbage. So I'm playing a lot more last year, I guess, than I ever did previously.
I'd like to explore some of the culture, and you've alluded to this already a little bit, but I'd like to investigate this a little bit more, if you don't mind. A quote that's frequently attributed to Goonswarm is, "We're not here to ruin the game, we're just here to ruin your game." Tell us what that means to you.
Back in the day, in the early days of Goon Fleet, we were a very different organization. Lordless was like a pirate and griefer organization, but very small scale. Like, this is a corporation of like 30 guys. The early days, if you look back, September 2005 to July of 2006, early Goon Fleet really wanted to be loved and accepted by the EVE community as a whole. We actually didn't allow espionage. I was brought on as an espionage director because I was made a director. I was like, I want to do espionage, and then everybody was like, no, you can't do that because the culture at the time in EVE was very obsessed with E-Honor. Everyone wanted to be spaceship samurai, and it was very hypocritical, but that was the culture at the time. And so we didn't allow scamming. We didn't allow local smack talk. We had banned posting on Evo. Basically, when we were growing up in Syndicate before the Great War kicked off, we wanted to be accepted and validated and loved by the EVE community as a whole, to be taken seriously and to be just sort of a normal, upstanding alliance who happened to be goons. And then, as soon as we sort of stepped foot into Sov Nullsec, we went from Syndicate to try to invade Cloud Ring in XZH and ended up in a conflict with UWhat and Razor, which eventually, shortly after that happened, Band of Brothers declared that we were terrible human beings and that we were a cancer on EVE and we had to be destroyed. So it's kind of funny because by pointing their fingers at us and saying that we are these awful monsters, we actually became the monsters that they said we were. We, at that point, said, okay, well, we wanted to be accepted in the EVE community and rejected, and said that we were aliens that had to be shoved out because we're from something awful. We're not EVE-born. We don't grow up the same way that most EVE players do. So after that, we basically said, okay, well, we tried to play nice. We tried to follow your rules, your culture, and you still try to murder us and kick us out of the game. So let's take the gloves off ourselves and see what we can do. And ever since then, that has absolutely been our policy. We have one rule, which is we try to be the best possible friend. We treat our allies very well. We never betray an ally. We try to help our allies as much as we possibly can. We integrate them into our fleets. This has always been our policy, but we try to be the worst possible enemy. And I think that we've done a pretty good job of fulfilling that. And so, yes, that quote, which was originally from Darius Johnson, my CEO of my heart, was, we're not here to ruin the game, but we are here to ruin your game, if you're on the wrong side of our guns.
Excellent. Great explanation. I want to talk to you a little bit about winning EVE Online. Clearly, the CFC is doing extremely well, taking a lot of territory in null space. What does winning EVE Online mean to you? And does that mean controlling all of null security space, or do you have some different metric for that?
Well, for me, EVE is more about my friends, our society, our culture. We have really become a group of people who like to fly all around the world and have parties and also play spaceship games together. So it's not really about a game that we're trying to win, right? We play EVE. It's our hobby. We hang out with each other. We tell the same stupid jokes. We make Zor chains in local or whatever. So for me, there is no winning EVE end goal. We just try to protect our people because ever since the Great War, there are outsiders who say that goons are awful people and need to be destroyed. So we basically, if you actually look at most of what the CFC has done and what Goonswarm has done, we're a fairly reactive organization. People mess with us and then we mess back. With the exception of things like Burnjita, then we're definitely on the attacking side. A lot of times people who are relatively new to EVE think that conquest or taking over the entire galaxy is a goal or should be a goal. And I think if you game it out, if you think about the practical matter of trying to conquer all of the Sov and Nullsec, it would be foolishly self-destructive. Even if you managed to do it, then you'd have to hold it. The geography doesn't really work out very well with the capital bridge ranges, and it's also unnecessary. It just doesn't matter. Why would Goonswarm or the CFC need more space than it has? We just fought a war with basically against everybody else in EVE, and we're just giving all this territory that we took to the Russian coalition because, Immensea, Tenerifis, Detorid, we ground those regions, Immensea, Tenerifis, and Amist, and we just gave them away. We're like, okay, have some Sov, whatever, we're out of here. Everybody, it's a sandbox. Everybody makes their own rules. What's funny in a sandbox game is not your own standard of winning. What's funny is when somebody else in the sandbox points at you and says, you're playing with your sand in the wrong way. That's what's funny.
Yeah, I agree with that. In fact, we get a lot of flack for trying to teach all different play styles in EVE Online. And some people say, no, that's wrong. This is the right way to play. That seems to me very arrogant. Would you agree?
Yeah, but then again, people are allowed to be arrogant. That's the thing. If you do that, though, odds are somebody's going to kick sand in your face.
That's true. We're getting some good questions from the participants. I do have some other ones for you on some other subjects, but I do want to get some of these questions. Helios Swipe Moondraft asks, do you get much hate mail?
Not regularly. Most of the time, my mailbox is a hilarious disaster of people who've been recruitment scammed trying to talk to me about how they got recruitment scammed. Or various things like that. I'll occasionally get somebody who's really angry and will mash out a hate mail, but it doesn't happen as much as you'd think. And besides, when somebody does that, it basically shows that you have power over them. If somebody is writing, "Rawr mittens, I hate you," I don't like you, you're a bad person, you don't play the game that the way I do, and they send that to you. That's not the kind of thing that hurts me. That doesn't hurt my feelings. It just says that this person is essentially at our mercy, and they're flashing that card by writing such a thing. So there you go.
That's a good attitude. I'm going to mispronounce his name. Keltri Raphalim asks, how much time does it take for you to lead Goonswarm in the CFC?
It depends upon whether we're at war or not. Because when we're at war, I used to help plan our wars back in the day when I was just the spy guy and sort of the number 2 dude in the Alliance up until 2010 or whatever. And so when we're at war, I tend to take a much more active hand. These days, that means leading capital fleets. But so, war in EVE, particularly at the block level, is an incredible time commitment, right? Especially when it's involving multiple time zones. My phone is going off, I'm getting texts like, this happened, that happened, you need to respond to things. When that happens, it can be almost a full-time thing. You can easily sink all day into block war, which is why people get exhausted by it so quickly and tend to break after only a month or two. When we're not at war, because everything that we do in Goonswarm and the CFC is arranged and delegated, most of the time the organizations just run themselves, and I only have to tune in to fix organizations. So an ideal setup is when we're at peace, the orgs are humming along and doing their thing, and I get to work on fine-tuning the organizations, making new ones, the Ministry of Love is a completely new organization we made a couple years ago, which is our high-sec arm that runs around sowing terror and ganking people and hunting down unpeople. And that's a new organization. I really enjoy just the org work, so that's what I spend my time on when we're at peace.
Very good. I'm going to mispronounce this one too. Hyun asks, your enemies often say that CFC wins because of sheer numbers. First of all, do you agree with that? And if so, why are the other coalitions having relatively high barriers to entry in their alliances, unlike the CFC?
I think that the CFC tends to win its wars because of the strength of the organization itself, and I can say that with the perspective of somebody who has a rather effective spy network. So most of the time when we're at war with somebody, I'm reading their command channels and I'm watching their leadership work with each other. And most of the hostile coalitions that we've fought are not particularly well integrated. The CFC is relatively egalitarian. We're kind of a meritocracy. We have participation link system where pilots click on PAP links, so we know how well everybody is pulling their weight, and people are rewarded according to that. And also, because each CFC entity is trying to be an independent deployable alliance that can act separate from the coalition as a whole, there's really not that much, there's I guess the best way to describe it is that there's multiple layers of organizational effectiveness there that you can fall back through. As opposed to our enemies, oftentimes it's a few people at the top who are doing everything. guy who's holding up everything and leading all the fleet burns out or goes away or isn't available for a couple days, then they're in a lot of trouble. Regarding the numbers thing, fundamentally it doesn't matter. And this is, I think this is a point that our enemies and detractors don't understand about us. Because since we don't recruit from the public, in Goonswarm at least, what other people say about us, about how we win or what we do, it doesn't matter, right? Like the end result, as far as we're concerned, is all that matters. So you can point your finger at us and say that we're dirty blobbers or that we're mean people who metagame, but great, at the end of the day, whatever, we still won.
Absolutely true. Question here from Munga Kimzari. As a new player lured to EVE by the recent headlines about the big battles and BR and so forth, what suggestions do you have to a new player regarding a career path or training to become useful to an organization like Goonswarm?
Well, the thing about Goonswarm is that a new player can be useful inside of 2 days, even probably less than a day. The reason why Goonswarm and organizations like E-UNI or Brave Newbies are so good with new players is that they have mentor programs and structures set up. So in Goonswarm, we take our newbies and we teach them murder. I mean, we believe in nullsec that the most important thing for people to learn is that EVE is primarily the way that we play it. You can play it in other ways, but for us, EVE is primarily a PvP game. And that for us, a newbie can make a difference in these big battles inside of 3 hours of training. Like as soon as you have propulsion inhibition trained or whatever, you can actually go out there, tackle somebody and make a difference, or you can use a Celestis, you can damp other players in combat and make a huge difference. So if I'm a new player coming in, I would say that you want to join Brave Newbies, or you want to join EVE University, or if you are a Goon, Goonswarm. If you're not a Goon, I would suggest not trying to join Goonswarm. But just get stuck in. I mean, that's the thing about EVE, is that because it is a sandbox that intimidates people, what you really need is social help. You need to have a mentor, you need to have somebody you can talk to, a support structure. And you need to actually get out there and get over your fear of loss. You need to get killed quite a few times before you realize that it doesn't matter and sort of get some blood on your hands. At least that's how we do things.
Absalon Etchery asked a question that I had previously listed that I wanted to ask you. It's a little bit more on a serious note. The Mittani.com's masthead includes a tribute to, or a memorial to, Val Rat, which is the EVE Online character of Sean Smith, who died in the September 11th attack in Benghazi. Given that you've had some time now since that terrible event, how has Sean's death affected you?
Well, I mean, he was one of my best friends, and he was my right-hand man in EVE. So, like, when one of your best friends is murdered in a foreign affair, and then that murder is dragged through the mud of a national political election, and you have people who you don't even know coming up to you and trying to involve you in the politics of that, it's fair to say that I'm deeply bitter about the entire thing. I mean, I miss Sean every fucking day. Every time that we end up in a situation diplomatically that's complex, I mean, our chief diplomat now, Sion Kumitomo, was mentored by Sean. And, Sion does a great job. But there's a lot of times where Sion and I are, like, noodling over a diplomatic problem, and it's just like, Jesus Christ, this, I just wish Valrat was here. Because he was the best at what he did. I mean, he fucking changed the landscape of EVE repeatedly during the Great War, and many of the structures of EVE today, the way they are because of what he pulled off. Yeah, I mean, it's just shitty. There's really not that much to say about it. Death sucks. Having one of your best friends murdered sucks. I advise try not to have it happen to you. But, Sean was, he really wanted to go out there and change the world, and I hope that he did. And I miss him every day. I guess that's really all there is to say about it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Does a loss like this make you worry about real-life stuff more, like the recent events in Ukraine, or does it not have any effect? Is it too personal?
Well, we're not worrying about real life. The question is sort of odd because it implies that one would not be paying attention to world events. I mean, the thing about EVE is that it's a very international game. I mean, especially if you have a Russian coalition in one of the channels that I'm in here on Skype. I'm looking over here and then scroll back. You see lots of discussion about what's going on in the Crimea because you have a lot of Russian players and a lot of Ukrainian players who are often in the same alliances. So it is really interesting to see how world events actually have an impact in EVE and on EVE players.
Excellent point. Speaking of the Mittani.com, you founded that. It's now become a very popular news site. Tell us why you did decide to start the Mittani.com, and how is it, in your opinion, how has it worked out?
Well, one of the things that I noticed when I was on the CSM is that oftentimes CCP only would respond to the CSM because of the media pressure we were able to bring to bear. Because I had been sort of a high-profile figure before I ended up on the council, and just, I guess, schmoozing and whatever. So we used media leverage to influence things and get things done, and we're more effective than any previous CSM in the process of doing that. And I just got sick of basically the people who cover EVE, typically in the gaming media, are incompetent at it. They don't write well about EVE, they don't understand it, or they are drooling idiots. So I was looking at the situation, I was looking at the press available about EVE, and I basically said, look, this is ridiculous, we can do a better job. And I'd like to think that we have. I mean, some people agree, some people disagree, but the site's success speaks for itself.
You mentioned on the Mittani.com and the About page that you do approach it from a certain point of view. I mean, you seem unabashed about the fact that you're going to approach the news from a certain point of view. Although you do have a number of different different writers from different alliances represented. Do you think it's possible to be totally neutral when you're covering something like what's happening in EVE Online?
I think that the idea of objective news reporting is sort of the same kind of question from a perspective of people asking about conquering all of nullsec, right? The question itself sort of betrays a misunderstanding, right? If you look at any news source, anytime a human communicates something to another human, it's impossible for the context and the experiences of the person doing the communication, it's impossible to have that divorce. There is no objective truth that's completely free of accusations of bias in any communication. And if you look at every internet media site, be it in gaming, be it on real-world news or what have you, there are always accusations of bias, regardless of the medium. Even things that some people would are not biased, like like BBC, others say are horribly biased. So one of the things that I found in running the website and in my experiences as an alliance leader is that you can never make everybody happy. There's always going to be people who love you. There's always going to be people who hate your guts. And it's really not worth your time to try to satisfy the fringe critics. There's always going to be somebody pointing and screaming at you. So with the Mittani.com, we try to do a good job. I'd like to think that our coverage is as objective as possible. Is it perfectly objective? No. But nothing is. And the idea that that can be achieved is naive, in my view. And if you disagree with me, you can always just go to some other website.
That's a good point. E-UNI asks another question that I had on my list for you, and that is, Goonswarm seems to have mastered solve mechanics and logistics. You've lost territory several times, sometimes on your own volition, but you always seem to be coming back winning. Do you think that sovereignty mechanics in EVE Online need to be changed? And if so, how would you change them?
Well, that's a tough one. A lot of times our enemies will say that solve mechanics are broken because we're winning. So it's sort of, it has to be kind of separated from that. I mean, we have survived and prospered and prosecuted block wars under the old POS warfare system, and we've done well in Dominion. Dominion, a lot of people are unhappy with. People were also unhappy with POS warfare. I think that most of us who are bitter veterans of Sov War are skeptical of CCP's attempts to change SOV because the last time they tried to shake it up with Dominion, they made a dog's breakfast of it. And so there's a deep skepticism that the same people who brought us Dominion would somehow be able to improve upon that. I kind of liked POS warfare. I didn't like the scale of POS warfare. Like in a system that had a small number of moons, for those of you who weren't around back in the day, the old SOV system would be based upon majority control of towers on moons in a given system. So if you have a system with 11 moons, if I have 6 moons, I have the SOV, even if the other guy has 5 towers there. Anyway, so you would have these fights over towers and would break your logisticians because the logistics guys wouldn't just be setting up towers for moon mining or what have you, or staging towers. Your logisticians would have to just throw towers up in a system to claim it. So in the aftermath of the Great War, when we purged Delve, we had to burn down something like 650 or 700 of their towers over this 3 or 4 week period, just to sort of clean things up. There was a proposal about going to a planet-based system, because most systems have a lot fewer planets, right? So some systems can have like 70 moons, and those are a nightmare for the POS warfare system. But if you shifted to like SOV markers on planets or something like that, you could have kind of a balance. I don't know. I have yet to encounter, and it has been years since Dominion. Dominion came out in December of 2009. Everybody says the SOV system sucks. Everybody says it should be changed. No one, not me, not anybody else that I have seen, has ever actually come up with something that people can agree is better. And that, when there's not really a clear choice like that, oftentimes it's probably best to just stick with the status quo. Eventually they're going to change it, but we'll just have to see how it goes. I don't have the answers.
Fair enough. One of the things about the current mechanics is it does seem to encourage these massive blob fights, and of course tie-dye is one way to help manage that, but that can't scale over time. So what do you think about trying to spread or break up these massive sites on the same grid into something that might be spread over one system or several systems in different locations? Is that something that would be good, in your opinion, for EVE Online?
Again, that question betrays a certain assumption, the idea that we should avoid fights, and it also betrays the assumption that that blob fights are unique to Dominion. In the POS warfare mechanics, warfare is always localized. Before Dominion, we still had massive 1,000-plus person battles. One of the basics of military strategy is you bring more than the other guy, you have more forces, stronger forces, you bring force multipliers, and you win. And one of the other things about this that's important is when people who advocate for avoiding big battles start talking about things, asking questions like you did, talking about spreading out different objectives, what they fail to understand is that it is these very big battles which bring in a whole number of new players. In this channel right now that we are giving this lecture in this Q&A, there are probably 50, if not more than 100 people who are new to EVE because of BR5, because of these massive, chaotic space battles. Those people want those battles. They don't want to have 20 guys squabbling over an SBU in one system and, whatever. They want to get written up in the BBC for winning a space war.
Absolutely. In fact, I think that some people believe that it's good for CCP because you bring so many new people in to have these massive Titanic kinds of battles. So,
Asakai did the same thing. Absolutely. Like when you get a big press spike, you get a whole bunch more people playing the game. It's good for business, it's good for EVE, it's good for CCP, and when you watch science fiction, like any kind of sci-fi movie, you don't see here are like 3 or 4 spaceships swatting at each other over an SBU. You see these epic, amazing star destroyers clashing, crazy space battles in Babylon 5 or in Battlestar Galactica. Those are the scenes that capture the imagination.
I have a few other questions. I want to get as many of these in as we can, although it's very clear we're not going to get to everybody's questions, so sorry about that, everyone, in advance. Ivan Malis asks, what do you think about the recently announced E-UNI Test SS Coalition.
I think that Brave Newbies has always impressed me. They showed up in OW778, and I really like their attitude. The test guys, I'm a little skeptical about that because some of the leadership in test has finally admitted that they were looking to betray us and destroy us while we were still blue. The person who had been Montolio's second in command, a guy named Robert, was finally, after many years of denying this, admitted it in a Reddit post not too long ago. So I wish Brave Newbies all the best. We'll just have to see what happens.
Frederick Weasley asks, Mittens, what whiskey goes best with internet spaceships, in your opinion?
I'm a fan of O-Band 14 myself.
Great. I have a question for you. Ninjas, robots, or pirates?
Robots.
Excellent. That's the only right answer. Twipson asks, I want to know how often Mittens gets to actually log in and just pew-pew for fun and giggles and not deal with heavy Corp Alliance Coalition politics drama.
Well, that's kind of a funny question because I'm one of those people who actually enjoys the org work and leadership. Like, I enjoy this. This is the fun for me. But during the Halloween War, MNC, I think, actually, based upon our CFC participation statistics, it turned out that I was the 11th most active FC in the CFC just from running supercarriers. And then in Fountain, I did a bunch of dread work, and I'm actually about to take dreads out once this Q&A is over. I think it's sort of, I don't want to say short-sighted, but, that leadership and that working on these things, working with people, thinking about politics, the assumption that that's not fun is one that I agree with. A lot of people don't like that. A lot of people are going like, oh, I just want to pew-pew. I just want to be a fleet commander, and how, dealing with people drives me crazy. But I like it.
Anna Niad asks, how do you have a team of directors function without AWOXing or theft?
Oh, you just have to have a good eye for people. I mean, our guys, I can trust them. We haven't had a director be compromised since 2008. And, of course, Goonswarm has it easy because we come from an external culture, right? Like, we have some people who are not goons in our directorate, obviously, our member corp representatives, and we are a meritocracy. So there's a number of people in the Goonswarm directorate that are not from something awful. But you just have to develop an eye for learning who can be trusted, who can't, and having a good counterintelligence department helps too, such that you can do background checks.
Marlon Spike von Krendraven, asks, most people have heard the story of Goons versus Bob and the downfall of Bob, but are there any lesser-known stories about Goonswarm that you think are important that you'd like to share?
Important stories about Goonswarm. I don't know. We have such a long history that, like, the big ones people talk about are the Great War. I really enjoyed how, actually, this is a good one. So in the early days of the Great War, before we got to actually really fighting Bob, like, Band of Brothers invaded us. They said, we're cancer, we're terrible people, that we're monsters, and that we have to be destroyed and removed from you for the good of the game. And they vilified us, and they got everybody to vilify us. At that point, all of the English-speaking alliances in nullsec lined up to clutch at their pearls and wave their fingers and get cases of the vapors. The alliance that did not do that, there were two of them, actually. One of them was Red Alliance, the other was Tau Ceti Federation. And the Russians had also been vilified by the English-speaking community because they were not playing in the sandbox by the rules of the rest of that community. Because the Russians were always fighting outnumbered in odd time zones, and so they had to adopt ruthless tactics to survive. RA was getting attacked by Laca Volterra, and an entity which was called the Southern Coalition at the time. It had about 13,000 pilots. Red Alliance had 800 pilots. And, they would use log-off traps. They would control Q to escape fights that were unwinnable. They used blue balling as a tactic. So when Laca Volterra would bring a fleet into Red Alliance's capital system, and say, fight us, Red Alliance would give them the finger and say no, and then Lac Volterra would just have to go home because they weren't sieging it or anything like that. This was considered to be dishonorable, and they were outcasts and pariahs. And a lot of times people will ask why goons are pretty much always on the side of the Russians and why we have such a large French component is because when everyone else was saying that we are monsters, the Russians and the French invited us over and took us in, and we sort of found some of our oldest friends. Goonswarm now has a very significant Russian wing and a French wing from those, and that's part of the reason why we got involved in the Halloween War on the side of the Russians, is those long ties. And that's a thing about Goonswarm's history that I think people miss, is that we always remember who helped us out in our time of need. And even, Christ, Red Alliance invited us to Innsmouth in like September of 2006. And a lot of those old guys have moved on into different Russian alliances in Solar Fleet, Darkness of Despair, and Legion of Death. And we still remember and are grateful.
Thank you. Excellent. I do want to ask you a question about the CSM. You were a chairman of the CSM. How effective do you think the CSM is in representing player interests?
Yeah, I think it depends upon the CSM, and I think it depends upon the quality of the representatives. You can have CSMs which make a lot of things happen. You can have CSMs which don't seem to make anything happen. It also depends upon whether there's a crisis point. Some CSMs have had it easy, where there's no incarnate crisis basically to deal with, or when CCP is trying to fix the game rather than trying to drive the game off of a cliff into bankruptcy. So you just kind of have to make your own judgment. I'm done with it myself, as I'm no longer working for free as an unpaid consultant. But, it's a political thing, so some people are going to say it matters, some people are going to blow off and say it's irrelevant. I think it can have some positive influence. I think it can have a very negative influence in situations where you have incompetent people there. That was basically the reason why CSM 6 happened, was because interest in the CSM had plummeted between 3, 4, and 5. The voting numbers decreased. So by the time that you got to CSM 5, it was basically this, in my opinion, a gaggle of nobodies who had no idea what they were doing, mouthing off about topics that they had no experience in. You had people who had never been to nullsecing about how nullsec should be, and they wanted to get jump ridges removed and all this other stuff, having never actually experienced the game. So I think that having a sim is a danger, and I think that is inarguable. Whether you want to say that it's the most effective thing in the world, that is something that is hotly debated.
Well, for what it's worth, your work on CSM 6, I believe it was instrumental, I think, in helping bring CCP back to a right way of thinking, a more player-oriented way of thinking. Clearly there was a crisis, as you said, and CSM did a good job of bringing that back. There hasn't been the same kind of crisis since then. Does that make the CSM less important or less effective in your eyes?
You don't need to have a crisis to be less effective. I think that effectiveness in a political situation is usually based upon your ability to be charismatic and persuade people. So if you're going to have people who are politically adept, they're good at getting a consensus together, they're able to persuade the developers to see their point of view and understand things, those guys are going to be effective. But, it's tough because when you're reading people's manifestos and their candidate pages or what have you, you don't really have an idea of how good they are at schmoozing in a bar in Iceland and saying, look, man, this is ridiculous. We've got to make some changes here, and swaying people. And fundamentally speaking, the job is about communication. It is about swaying people. And I think that's what people have to keep in mind when they're considering candidates.
Denny Fleetfoot asks, how do you feel about CCP's move to making New Eden their IP, their intellectual property platform, and adding games like Dust and Valkyrie and new media like the comics and the TV show, etc. Do you feel that takes the focus off of EVE Online? Is that a good thing, or do you think it's a bad thing for the game?
Well, I think that if CCP had done a more effective job in designing a game that was entertaining with Dust, that New Eden as a whole would be much larger and there'd be a lot more interest in EVE. Like if Dust had taken off, if it wasn't sort of a damp squib, then EVE would have benefited. I think Valkyrie is going to be huge. I've experimented with Valkyrie several times, variations at E3, at FanFest, and it was like a religious experience. I don't know, if you've never actually put an Oculus Rift on, Valkyrie is amazing because you are actually inside of the game, which is something that I sort of always imagined that gaming would turn into, and now we're sort of reaching that point of science fiction with virtual reality and Star Trek holodecks and what have you, actually becoming real. And the team that made Eve Valkyrie, I mean, these are a bunch of guys who did this in their 20% time, and they were just like, fuck it, let's just throw together this game because we know it's going to be awesome. And it is one of the coolest products that I've seen from CCP ever, and possibly the most amazing thing I've seen from them. I think transmedia is valuable. I think that CCP should continue to expand, but I think that we need to, a lot of it comes down to development efficiency. With Incarna and with Dust both, you saw what we assume are millions of dollars dumped into development, and just like having iterations of Incarna where they had it on the Unreal Engine in the early days of it, and then they just took all that development time, threw it out a window, and recoded everything from scratch in a way that would like make people's graphics cards scream. With Dust also, you saw a bunch of working prototypes and the code having to be refactored repeatedly. And that's just a production quality and efficiency thing. I think that if CCP got to be more effective as a developer, then we wouldn't have this question of, are these new projects going to interfere with EVE? I think that growing EVE and growing the EVE universe is a good business strategy. I think that Dust and Incarna and all of these things actually made a lot of sense on paper if they were implemented correctly. I liked Incarna. I wanted Incarna to go places. I thought it would expand the universe, but the implementation was just disastrous, and same deal with Dust. So that's where I'd like to see. I want to see them keep doing it. I want to see them get better at it.
Yeah, I agree with your assessment overall, especially on Valkyrie. I had a chance to try it at FanFest. I've not seen the new higher resolution versions of it. I understand they're fantastic, and it is true.
It's amazing.
It's an immersive experience, no doubt about it. Question from Afra, so asked somewhat humorously. Do you have spies in EVE University?
No, actually, I don't.
But, of course, we would expect you to say that.
Of course, I would deny it.
We've had this question from a number of people. How did you choose your name, the Mittani?
That's actually kind of a funny old story. I minored in ancient law back when I was in undergrad, and I learned to read Akkadian, and then, of course, have promptly forgotten all that because you're not exactly translating cuneiform on a daily basis in the real world. We were studying the Amarna letters, which are a series of diplomatic correspondence between the great powers at the time in Mesopotamia, which was Egypt and Akkad, and the Hurrians, which was the Mittani. And I just thought the name sounded cool, so when I was making my Eve character, I was like, well, what do? I don't know, whatever, the Mittani. Like, I didn't know when I was first playing Eve that I was going to end up, like, being some dude, like, giving Q&As and having people giving a crap what I say. So I just sort of pulled the name out of my hat.
Very good. I did kind of the same thing myself. We have a question here from Hyun Jung again. Gevlon Goblin has gotten some attention lately with his announced plan to wardeck CFC and making it difficult to operate in HiSec. Has this campaign made any difference whatsoever to the CFC?
Who?
Excellently answered. James Fenord asks, who do you think we should vote for when the CSM elections come along?
Well, there's going to be a CFC voting list, and I don't expect people who aren't in the CFC to do that. Most blocks will have their rosters of candidates. If you're looking for independent candidates that aren't associated with block, I don't know. I could tell you who I think would be really good, but I'm afraid that if I said who they would be, that then they would be accused of being goon plants, which always happens. On the other hand, anybody who we put on our voting roster is going to be accused of that. I think that Ali Aris has done an amazing job. Mina, who is our CSM representative, just speaks the world of her. She had originally been a Pravi Block candidate, I believe, and now she's not in Pravi Block. I think she's in War. But she's really dedicated and just incredibly intelligent. I think Jane Fillon is going to be running this go-round. He writes for the Mittani.com, and he has a very he's very detail-oriented. He's really good at fact-checking things. He really examines things in a careful way. So if you're looking for a non-block candidate to support, I would say that Jane and Ellen would be great choices off the top of my head.
Do you think you'll still be playing EVE Online 5 years from now?
If it still exists, and if Goonswarm still exists, yeah. I mean, if Goonswarm implodes and my people leave the game, then I don't really have any interest in the game anymore. I do this for my guys and my friends and my drinking buddies who I, travel the world with, I've never actually really played EVE outside of a Goon organization. So, if something happens to my guys and we leave the game en masse, then I'm out of here.
On Mittani.com, you cover a number of other games. Any of those that strike your fancy as something you might eventually play more than EVE Online, or something that you find intriguing that might actually be something you invest more time in?
I think of EVE as like a hobby, not just a game, right? Because so much of EVE involves things that happen outside of the client. And hobbies don't really change easily. I mean, the things that I'm into hobby-wise, I still like since, I started playing Warhammer 40K in the 10th grade. And here I am, I'm 35 years old, and I still like Warhammer 40K. So it's the same deal with EVE. Other games that I play that I'm curious to see Watch Dogs as just a fun game to play. I was disappointed with the Thief reboot. I'm kind of playing a little bit of the Diablo 3 Loot 2.0 system, which is kind of like turned Diablo 3 into the game it should have been at launch. It kind of looks like an unexciting year as far as games go. I'm watching Star Citizen. I mean, everybody who plays EVE is keeping their eye on Star Citizen, not only to point and laugh at the fan fiction and the sort of religious fervor that people have for a game that doesn't exist, but I think that it would be great to have more competition and do well, just such that there are more spaceship games, more options, and, hopefully CCP, if they do it well, things and best practices that CCP can appropriate from these other games.
I know we're getting close to our end time together. Appreciate the time that you spent with us, but you just have a couple more questions if we can have a few more minutes.
Yeah, we can stick around for another 10 minutes or so. It's no big deal.
Excellent. Norte Reitai asks, what's your opinion of Wormhole Space and Wormhole Space Corps in general?
Well, Wormhole Space, I think, is wonderful because it allows people who are interested in a much smaller scale of warfare, and for people who want to have a no-local environment, they get to have that kind of gameplay. We don't really get involved in that because from just the nature of Wormhole Space, it's impossible to really pack more than a few hundred people into any one wormhole, right? So with Goonswarm, we just have too many people. We have a squad that's in a wormhole and does their own thing, called Whole Squad. But I think WSpace is great. I think it's one of the most diverse and interesting. It's like a little alternate EVE universe that everybody in nullsec gets to kind of look at. But I've never really seriously considered going there just because I can't, you can't pack all of these goons into a wormhole. It wouldn't work.
Nibbler asks, do you think that Titan bridges is a mechanic that needs to be changed? I think what he's getting to there is it too easy to do force projection in EVE Online under the current mechanics?
If you want to change force projection, you should be removing or lessening the jump ranges, particularly for carriers. I mean, carriers are the reason why people are able to bounce all the way across the galaxy and project an insane amount of power. Titan bridges, because they're restricted in light years, are really not a big deal. I mean, I imagine that you're unhappy with them if you get dropped on by a Titan, but many things have like a bridge mechanic, Black Ops ships, Titans, etc. The core of the power projection issue is it's twofold, right? One, it's the jump range of carriers themselves, and two, it's the rapidity with which you can jump. If you cap fit a carrier fleet, you can jump. We bounced during the Halloween War, and Goonswarm is not good at this. The CFC is notorious for being terrible at capital ops, right? Like, we're not PL. PL is really good at this. PL are the experts at bouncing around the galaxy. A PL fleet can be from Amamaki to any point in the 5 minutes. We managed to get from, I think it was one Victor in Scalding Pass, all the way to Fountain with a carrier fleet of like 100, I think we brought like 270 carriers down there. It was ridiculous. It was 2 fleets. And we had to move down there in 10 minutes because there's no capital jump timer. One of the things that we talked about that I advocated for when I was on the CSM was adding a jump drive spool up timer such that, okay, like, congratulations, you jumped, you capped up, that's great, but you can only actually make a capital jump once every 2 minutes or once every 5 minutes or whatever to cut down on that. I do think there is a capital power projection problem in EVE, but Titan bridges are not the core of it.
It's good insight, and I do agree. I think that it's a little too easy to move massive amounts of forces around, having some limitations. That seems inevitable. I think the CSM is considering some different ideas. I would expect that to be a theme coming up in the next update, but that's all speculation. I've had a number of people ask a final question here, and that is, they'd like to know, what is your most enjoyable in-game activity, the metagaming aside? What is the thing that you like to do most in EVE Online?
Dread Ops. I love Dread Ops. Carrier Ops are second to that, but dropping dreads on towers and blowing them up, or actual old school, like back in the day, cap warfare, where some of the best fights I ever had before super capitals proliferated too much. This is during the Great War, where siege cycles were 10 minutes and most of the big cap fights were dread on dread with some carrier action. And it was just this amazing feeling where you would both, somebody would sino in siege, and then another party would sino in on top of them in siege, and everybody was stuck there for 10 minutes, and you just knew that there was going to be incredible carnage. Like, it was just happening. What I enjoy doing these days is Dread Ops. I really enjoy running Dread fleets. Ninja Siege Ops are a lot of fun. And conveniently, one of the perks of being the Alliance leader is that my fleets tend to have pretty good discipline, because I tell people that if they don't pay attention, I'll just blow up their dreadnought. And so they tend to be pretty quick and efficient. And you undock, you bounce, you hit a tower. 5 minutes later, you're out, and you can actually do a whole lot of work and have fun doing it, and be done in like 45 minutes, which is something that you can't really do with a subcap fleet that sort of has to drag ass around for a long time.
Are you planning to come to FanFest this year? And would you recommend FanFest to the casual EVE Online player?
FanFest owns. I always go to FanFest, and it's great. It's just this huge party. If you're a casual player and you don't have many friends, you can make a lot of friends there. Iceland itself is a huge pile of fun if you've never been there. It's a great old town, basically. Iceland is not a town, obviously, but as far as these things go, it might as well be. It's just a great time. We always have... it's an opportunity to meet your friends from all around the world. The travel itself is fun. It's really more about the social experience at FanFest. Like, if you don't enjoy hanging out in bars with spaceship nerds, then you're not really going to have a good time. Like, if you're just going to show up to FanFest to, like, listen to CCP talk about spaceships, you're probably not going to enjoy yourself. If you show up to FanFest and you're like, okay, it's Wednesday night, FanFest starts today, we're going to go to the Celtic Cross, we're going to have the Tweet Fleet meet up, and we're going to roll around the city together with a bunch of spaceship friends. It's a great way to meet new people, and it's always a blast.
The only bad thing about it are the sulfury showers, which kind of sucks.
Yeah. The water does, the fart water, we call it. The hot water smells like farts.
That's true. Well, I will be there. It would be my pleasure to buy you a beverage of your choice, so I will look you up. Look forward to
Absolutely.
want to thank you for your time. We've covered a lot of ground here. We've got some great questions from the audience. Before we bid adieu, do you have any advice to new players in EVE Online? We have a lot of folks who have joined EVE University, and of course the Goons and EVE Online in general, who are brand new to the game. What parting words of advice would you have them as a new player joining the game?
As a new player joining the game, I'd say, and again, this reflects my own bias, I'm not going to tell you you're playing in the sandbox wrong, but from where I come from, I would say that you need to PvP, and you need to do it rapidly before you build up a sense of loss aversion. There are people who spend years in high-sec shooting rats on missions, saying that one day I'll be ready to PvP, and I'm just skilling up enough before I can PvP. And that's complete bullshit. You can be PvPing and making a difference and having fun from day one. So if you're in EVE University, join one of the combat squads, which they have. If you're in Goonswarm, you're already killing people and probably scamming people and having a grand old time. If you're not in EVE University, I'd suggest joining Brave Newbies, who are really, really good at getting people at, combat day one. That's it, is you need to experience the PvP aspect of the game before you get a whole bunch of self-created rules and issues and hang-ups about, oh, I'm not ready, or oh, I'm not good enough, or, then you get attached to a mission-running ship that's worth $1 billion ISK, and then, a year later you're in ALOD on the Mittani.com where we're mocking you for getting, blown up by tornadoes and not knowing how the game works.
Excellent advice. And thanks again for your time again. We appreciate it very much. For those of you who are asking, we will post this recording sometime in the next couple of hours to the EVE University wiki. Go to our class library there, and you'll see it there. Mittens, thank you very much for joining us today and for your candor and insight. We very much appreciate it.
All right, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure, guys. And congratulations on your 10th anniversary.
Yep, hopefully we'll have another 10, but we'll see how it goes, as long as you don't ruin the game for us.
I'll try.
All right, everyone, thank you very much. Thanks for joining. This is one of a series of interviews that we're going to be doing, so do check our EVE University forum for more news about additional interviews that we are going to be conducting, all during the month of March, of various prominent EVE Online personalities. This is just the first of many. So once again, thank you to the Mittani, and thanks for everyone for joining. Get out there and fly safe.